first start out in this hobby, getting a one-shot color camera is the most reasonable expectation. It's a way to get your foot in the door. It's a way to start out and try to figure out how to even get this hobby going, right? You're trying to figure out so much with your telescope, with your mount, with everything else. The last thing you want to do is have to worry about monochrome cameras and extra filters and a lot of extra stuff. But today what we're going to do is we're going to look at one-shot color narrowband data, something that you might get from an L-eXtreme or an L-enhance, for example. And a friend of mine from England, Peter, thanks Peter for sending this, by the way, has sent me this data that we're going to look at and we're going to process. It's actually going to help a lot of you, right? One-shot color narrowband processing. Where do you start? Where do you begin? And what steps do we take next? What do we look for, right? So we're going to treat this as if we just bought this camera ourselves and we just took this data. He did use, I believe it was the 10-inch Newtonian telescope to acquire this data. I've already looked at it just to get a sense of what we're going to be looking at, and it's actually really good one-shot color data. He took his time acquiring it and making sure he got good flats to really calibrate out as much as he could. So without further ado, let's get this party started. Okay, so you can see I am inside Pix Insight, and we're going to be operating primarily out of here, but I'm also going to use Photoshop. So we have a single image after stacking and calibration. So I'm going to go ahead and open up our screen transfer function, and let's unlock it and take a look at the data. So when I first started this hobby, I would look at this from the beginning and be like, oh my god, what did I just get? And don't ever think just based off of this view that your image is not good or that it can't be fixed, because with this particular image there's so much good data that's sitting just behind that little bit of haze. So once we clean up some of the background and really boost some of the nebulosity, you're going to be stunned at where we start and where we go. So let's get that going. First thing I'm going to do here is rename this to image 1. That way we have a start. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go to process, all processes. We're going to go down to dynamic crop. You don't have to use dynamic crop if you only have one image, but out of habit, I prefer to do it that way. So I'm going to bring it up just a little bit in and a little bit up and try to do it equal around all four sides, because a lot of times around the borders of your image you can have the most artifacts. So let's call that framing good there. I'm going to drag a copy over here and drop it on my backdrop and go ahead and run it. And we don't really need it anymore, but I do like to keep everything just because you never know if you need to go back to it. So that was the first thing we're going to do here. The next thing that we're going to look at doing is go to Process, Background Modelization, and Dynamic Background Extraction. So the next thing we're going to do is click the Reset button in the bottom. And I'm going to pull it up just because it does take up a fair amount of my screen here. We're going to do the bottom and the second one. We're going to change this to 2 because I want as much as possible with the tolerance. I'm going to change my sample radius to, with this camera, let's try 80 just to start with. And let's say 7 samples per row. When I started out doing this, I thought the more sample points, the better. But from what I could read, putting more sample points doesn't always mean you're going to get better results. What you want to do is you want to spend the time to make sure, especially with dynamic background extraction, with subtraction, that you really take your time. You get the right size and you put it where it's only background. You don't ever want to put it on your nebulosity. Now, it is designed that if you put it over a star, you'll see all black pixels. It's designed in a way that it is supposed to remove those and not sample the black points, but it is best to try to keep it off of those as much as possible. Not always can it do that, but you do want to just try to get only the background. Even if there's a tiny hint of nebulosity there, do not put a sample point there. But for what we're doing right here, it's okay to overlap stars and nebulosity because we're only doing the division function. But with subtraction, as soon as you hit nebulosity, it is going to remove some of the nebulosity from your image with regards to subtracting it as the background. So take your time, put it only in the background. More is not always better in this case, so we're only going to do 7. I find that works really well for me, at least. We're going to come down here, we're going to go to Division, Normalize, and Replace and Discard. I just check all 3. So we're going to go ahead and say generate. And even though it didn't generate these points because they probably have a higher tolerance due to the amount of hazing up there, that's okay though. We can go ahead and just remove the border, or excuse me, remove the insides, leaving the border ones right where they're at. I'm going to drag, hold, and drop, and we're going to run that. Okay, not a lot happened, but that's okay. So what we're going to do next is we're going to try to just let automatic background extractor try to do its thing. I'm going to deselect normalize, and let's just run it with those settings as is, and let's see what it gives us here. It is going to go to a black screen, so we'll have to re-stretch it, and I think we can work with that. I think that's going to be okay because a lot of our oxygen is still left intact and a lot of our hydrogen is still visible. We will have to stretch that a little bit. Using this particular image, we are definitely going to have to do some tone mapping just to assist with some of this oxygen here in the image. So I like where we're at, so we'll just leave it with automatic background extractor. We're not going to do a manual version. Now, because this is a one-shot color image, we will want to run background neutralization and color calibration. With monochrome data, you do not run those because you only run it on color data. So what we want to do is we want to find some of the background here, and I kind of like this area here. You want to find typically the darkest area of background that you can find. Now, if you look closely, you see how we have sort of purple and red pixels up here? That means there's nebulosity in there. But if we come up here, we only have like green, black, and blue, which is fine because we know that that's just the camera sampling the background of space. So we'll do Alt-N, we'll get the preview creation box, and then we're just going to draw it right here. Make sure 100% that you do not highlight any stars. This would be a bad sample. We're just going to sample this box right here, and we'll zoom out. Next thing we're going to do is go to background neutralization. Our reference image here is going to be the preview we just created. So image 1 preview, preview 1, say OK, and we're going to click apply. And look at that, we got a lot of red in there. Now that will change, that's not a permanent thing. We're not going to re-stretch it because we're going to run color calibration. Let me move this over here. Same thing down here, background reference is the preview that we created. So we're going to click here and go to the drop down and click preview 1, say OK, and apply. Now we're going to click the radiation button. It didn't do a lot in the way of cleaning up the background or anything like that. That's going to happen once we've removed the stars. So don't worry, we're on good pace right where we're at. So the next thing we're going to run here is Noise Exterminator. It is a linear image. You can confirm if your image is linear or not, again, by pressing F12. If it goes to a black screen, that obviously means you haven't stretched it. So there's no heartbeat, so therefore you have a single line, so it's linear. Click, hold, drag, and drop, and then we will cut back in just a minute. Okay, so Noise Exterminator is done. We will go ahead and minimize it. We're going to press F12 on the keyboard, and we can actually, before we do that, let's zoom in and look at this background area here. Before and after should be a great result and difference. Luckily, Peter's data actually is really good on the noise to begin with. Sometimes with a color camera, you can get some color pixelation here, and we can see that purple pixel in there essentially. So once we run Noise Exterminator though, it's gone. The different colors you see here, see I've got some purple or blue mixed in with the green, but after we run Noise Exterminator, that's cleaned up really well, giving us a very clean image to look at here. So now with the Crescent Nebula, one of the biggest problems with nebulas in general is the fact that nebulas are star-forming areas, which means there's a lot of stars in the region. Processing good data is sometimes difficult when your image is full of just stars. So that's why a lot of people will struggle with processing, especially of the Crescent Nebula, but a lot of nebulas, because if you don't remove your stars, you can quickly alter them and blow them completely out. That's why it's really important that we get all of the stars out as clean as possible, and that's why we're going to run Russell Crowe's Star Exterminator, because in my experience, it is the best tool to remove these stars, and that way we can truly work with the background and the nebulosity as opposed to trying to process the entire image as it exists on the screen right now. So now that we're here, we're going to go ahead and press F12 on the keyboard. We're going to go to Histogram Transformation. Whoa, that is massive. Let's shrink that down. Let's go to the reset button here and make sure our check mark is selected. It should be a lighter color box around the check mark once you've done that. We're going to bring in the white point, just bring it in all the way. Same thing again, just bring it in all the way. And now I'm going to make sure I click on the little circle for a real-time preview. This preview is massive, but it should be okay. When I record these videos, I have to downsize my screen, otherwise it's so small you guys can't see it. But when I do that, it makes this massive. So we're going to bring in that black point just ever so slightly, double checking up here that we do not, and keep your eye right up here, I'm going to drag this in too far, and you can see we're literally cutting off data. The difference is, watch here inside of the star area here, I'm going to do it again. Look how we're literally shaving off the data. Make sure that right up here, we're only touching the very base of the data once it starts to elevate from a straight line. So I always like to give just a little bit of a gap. As you can see here, it's not perfectly touching, but there is a little gap, which is going to be good enough for what I'm wanting. And then we're going to pull this in, and we're only going to focus on the stars. Do not look at the nebulosity. Don't look at anything but the stars. What setting keeps our stars from blowing out, but too soft? And let's see. So I'm going to select maybe right about here. This, yeah, that's going to be fine right there. So this 100% is off field, but what I personally look for is right. Let's look at this star right here. Watch the halo that's right around it. Every star has a halo here, but if you look closely, see how we don't see any of a halo? But right here, we see how it's really blowing out around it. So if we start here and we just slowly kind of bounce it back and forth until you see where you get the halo, but you don't get it blowing out, it's really going to be right in this general vicinity right about right here. And then if we just look at the rest of the stars in the image, none of them are blown out, but they have good color and they're not bloated. And one thing I love about Newtonians is that star spike. It's amazing to see. It's hard to work with, but luckily we'll be able to work around that. So we'll minimize our histogram transformation. I'm happy with where my stars are. My data looks good here as well. We've kept it all intact. We haven't cut anything off. So now that we have done our histogram transformation, we're going to go to our next item, which I don't know if you guys know, but I try to put these in order of when I'm going to run them. Having my curve transformations probably not accurate up here, but it's close enough. So Star Exterminator by Russell Crowe. We don't have a linear image, so make sure if you have that selected that you deactivate it. We do want to generate a star image, and the reason being, unlike monochrome data where we might do RGB stars, we already have our RGB stars, and we don't have any other images that we're going to be pulling stars from, so make sure you generate a star mask. We're going to run this. This does take a little while to run, so I'll check back once it's done. Now that Star Exterminator has run, we'll go ahead and minimize it. We're going to keep our star mask open for the time being because I do want to give some color. So right up here, we're going to click the Extract CIE-L, which is what I call the Luminance Mask because we're pulling out the lightness version of it. So with that open, we'll move it over here. We're going to click the tab, drag, and drop it right here inside this gray bar. Now your image is going to go completely red. If you recall from last videos, just right click it, go to mask and show mask to disable the show feature. Now we're going to go back to our curve transformation, and wow, that is huge. So that's we'll click it here. Whoop. A little click happy. Let's move it up here out of the way of the process console there. And now we'll go to preview. And what I'm going to do is just ever so slightly, I'm going to boost our lightness of our stars. And where you boost lightness, you want to boost a little bit of saturation. I'm not going to do anything too crazy. I just want to pull out a little bit of color from all of this because we do want some of that color, but it will disappear a little bit on us when we run our star reduction later. So we'll go to mask, remove mask. You don't have to do that step. I like to do it just because it gives the stars a little bit more of flare and a little bit of brightness to them. So I'm just gonna rename this real quick to RGB_stars. That's out of habit. I'll minimize this because we're done for now. We no longer need that star mask, so I will delete it because there's no reason to have that. Again, we can just generate a new one if we need. So now that we have this image, I'm gonna go File, Save As, Crescent. I'm gonna call this RGB1, save it as a TIFF file, 16-bit integer, and now let's go over to Photoshop. So now that we're inside of Photoshop, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to press Control J on the keyboard. I'm going to go to Filter. I'm going to go to my Pro Digital software, and I'm going to go Astro Flat. Now, this does a wonderful job for us. If you don't have that software, the other thing you can do is go Control Shift A, press and hold all at the same time, and then your camera raw feature is going to come up. What you want to run is dehaze. You see the difference here when I drag this? You want to boost that just a little bit, not too terribly much. Maybe a little bit of clarity. Yeah, we'll give clarity maybe 5 or somewhere in that region. I'm going to touch texture. I'm going to pull our exposure down just a tad, not much. Contrast, I don't really like adding contrast in Astro Images. I find that it doesn't work the way that you may want it to. Let's see, highlights. I don't think I want to change highlights at all. Shadows, let's see. Maybe, yeah, right about here in the 10 region. Get a feel here. I don't know if I want to change that. Yep, I'm gonna leave white points as is in black. We don't really want to make it lighter or darker, so I'll leave that blank as well. And then I'm gonna say okay. So now let's click the little eyeball here, and I'm gonna go Control J, and I'm gonna show you what the difference is. All I have to do here is click OK, and you can see there is a little bit of difference, and I think I like our version that we just did ourselves a little better. It flattens out the back, but if you start with haze, like we have a little bit of haze over here especially, sometimes what this software will do is spread it across the whole image, that way the whole image has it. And you can see our version is just a little less hazy, so we'll stick with that camera raw. So I'm going to delete the background layer that we just created, and I'm going to stick with our changes that we just did inside of camera raw. And again, to get to camera raw, it's Control Shift A on the keyboard. So now that we have our image here, let's go ahead and flatten it down because I like where we're at here. This is the step where we're going to go ahead and do some coloring now too. But as I said before, we need to do some tone mapping. So we can start working with the blue that's inside of there, but why not give that blue a little bit of a boost, help it really stick out. We're not going to alter the data that's there, but we're going to just simply boost the data that we have because we want that blue to really pop. It is faint. Anything with post-processing in general is already altering nebulosity in a way that you would never see it. So for some people to say that, oh, well, I wouldn't do that because that's not natural, none of this is effectively natural. So what we're doing is we're just simply enhancing the details that we have. Some people like it, some people don't. It's, again, this is your image. Do what you want, but this is what I would do to it. So let's go ahead and do some tone mapping. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go over here to our Channels tab. And I want to grab just the blue. Now just simply click anywhere inside this box, and you can always switch between your colors here, and we can see what RGB is giving us across the board. But in this case, I just want the blue. Okay, so After clicking the blue, we're going to say Control A to select all. Then we're going to press Control C to copy it. Then we're going to say Control N because we want a new page. Now, there is a glitch. Don't just say create. Photoshop has a glitch with the latest software that you need to click custom and then click back for the clipboard to properly resize. I don't know when that's going to be fixed or if it's fixed already, but last I'd read it didn't work well and I was having that issue. So I found if you just click the next one and then click back and then say create, that works fine. We're going to now say Control V to paste. What we'll do now is we'll come back over here on the right hand side. We're going to go to layers and I'm going to right click and say flatten our image. Now here's what I want to do. So at this point we have the image, but if we just stretch this, it's gonna stretch everything in the image. Now the only thing I care to stretch is gonna be what I'm gonna call the brain, right? The Crescent Nebula looks like a brain. I only want that blue in this case to really pop. If I make the blue in the background pop, it might really give a bad imbalance within the background portion itself. So this is where we will paint in a little bit of this tone mapping as opposed to doing the whole thing. And let me show you what happens first if we just stretch the whole thing and apply it. So what we'll do first is we'll say Control L and we're gonna pull that in to the white line and we're gonna boost the rest and we'll say okay. So if we don't paint this in, what we'll do is just say Control A to copy, or to select all, Control C to copy. We'll go back to our RGB image. I'm going to go back to channels. I'm going to click inside of the blue again and say Control V to paste it. And now I have to click the eyeball here. Now this is why I don't like doing the background too, because it gives you a lot of purple inside of the background, which I personally don't like. So this is where I prefer, once we've stretched it here, we're going to go back to the layers. I'm going to undo and I'm going to say Control J, then Control L, and I'm going to redo the changes that we just did. But here's what I'm going to do differently. I'm going to put this in the brain only by clicking the masking option down here, and then on the keyboard Control I to invert it. Now we're going to grab a paintbrush. We're going to make sure that it's white down here, and we're fine up here, and this is where I'm just gonna bring that out inside of the nebula itself, just like so. Now if you want to check to see where you've painted, you press Alt on your keyboard and click inside of the mask and it will show you this circle, and we can just make sure it's as white as possible as we go around. And now we'll press Alt and click inside the mask again, and then here we are. So if you click the eyeball, it disables it, and you can see before and after. So now what we can do is right click, flatten image, Control A to select, Control C to copy. We can go back to our original image, go to channels, click on your blue, and paste just there. Then we can make sure that up here we are, you know, your screen might look like this. Make sure you click the eyeball back on the RGB, layers, and then here we are. So all we did was just boost that blue a little bit. We didn't really want it to impact our background or anything like that. So this is how you get your blues to boost a little bit more. So from here, I'm going to say Control D because I want to deselect. And I want to say Control J because I want a new layer. And I'm going to come down here to Selective Color. And let's begin to color here. I don't like where the screen is, but let's put it up here. Let's move it over here. So properties, we have red. So let's look at our background and look at that. If we pull all the cyan out of the background here, I don't know if we really need magenta. What if we go back to 0? And again, coloring is one of the most difficult parts, and it is on feel. So let's say 72% magenta, yellow. Like if you want the purple look, you can always pull your yellow out of your reds and it'll give you a purplish look, but I personally, I don't care for it. I'm gonna leave this at 0. And let's see if we want to boost the background by pulling out the black, but that really kind of kills our color. So let's leave that as is. So now let's go check our cyan. And we want to boost our cyan and see where that gives us color. And again, I like to pull this and bounce it. It might... Don't follow me on screen when I do that. It might make you dizzy. I always am looking inside of the blue here to see what's actually being impacted before I make a decision. So I'm going to go ahead and boost cyan all the way. Now, here's what I don't like. If we pull out all the magenta, we get this really teal color here, the very purpley, and I don't like that for this particular image. So in this case, we're actually going to boost our magenta maybe by 23, somewhere in there. And then yellow, let's take a look at yellow. If we pull all the yellow out, we go much more blue. So I personally like that. And then let's mess with our black point here. And if we pull too much out, it lightens it up. You lose your saturation. But if we boost it, it kind of darkens your image. So let's just maybe leave that. Tell you what, let's just leave that at 0. Now, let's go to the blues and let's repeat. We're going to move this and see if we pull all the blue out, it goes very red. But if we put a lot of blue in, or if we boost our blues with more cyan, then we can probably leave magenta alone. Let's see what happens with our yellow. We'll pull maybe 20 out of the yellow, and it is maybe a little too blue. I know that might sound weird, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the black out maybe to about right here, about 14. And then from here, I'm going to go to our selective color, and I'm going to say merge down. I'm going to go back up here, and I'm going to go back to selective color. And I want to look at our neutrals and just see what happens if I start modifying our background a little bit. So I kind of like this. I'm going to pull a little bit of cyan out of the image overall. I don't want to give too big of a boost because that's way too much. Maybe right about here on 5. Let's see what happens with yellow. I'm gonna maybe just do, let's just do 6 for yellow. And let's see what we want here. If you want more of like a dramatic effect, you can really boost that black for just your background, if you'd prefer. But I'm gonna leave it, yeah. You gotta find a good balance between background and nebula. So maybe, yeah, maybe just about 2. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the reds now, and let's pull maybe some more cyan out. I'm not going to do a lot this time, just a little bit to do some final touches. I'm not going to touch our magenta. Let me double check. If I put it in, if I put too much in, it kind of goes pink. How about just 10 or 9? That's fine. Yellow, I'm not going to touch yellow. And then I think I'm going to call that good with the reds. I'm going to go back to our cyan, kind of mess with the blue and get it where we want it for this last phase. So I am going to boost the cyan 100% again. And this time I'm going to pull just a little bit of magenta out. And let's maybe pull... let's maybe go 60-ish% on yellow, and here we go, about 20% on black. We're going to look at our blues now, and let's see if we want to add any. I think I'm going to boost that maybe to about here, about 20 range. And I'm going to pull out a little bit of magenta because we do want blue, but I still kind of want a little bit of turquoise into it. And again, this is just straight feel. You're just watching the image and how it changes as you move this bubble. This is maybe too blue for my liking, so maybe right about here. And then we can pull the black out. Maybe just do about 11, 10 or so, 11. So I think that looks fine right there. So we're going to right click and say Flatten Image. Now with this next step, I'm going to say Control J. I want to make a copy. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to press and hold Alt on the keyboard and zoom in. And let's take a look at this. I want to say Filter, Other, High Pass. And you want to find a radius that doesn't make it blow out like that, but you also don't want it to be blank, because we want these areas of interest to kind of pop. So I actually kind of like right there about 3.5. We'll say okay. Now we're going to come to this normal, and we're going to change this to, it's either between overlay or soft. It just depends on what you think looks better. I'm going to go ahead and say overlay for this one. And then we'll zoom out and let's see if it modifies anything else in the image, or if it's just, yeah, I think that's fine. So here's the before and after. Like, look at the flames up here. Before and after. See how that high pass, it just really helps those darker areas pop a little bit. And it gives a little bit of texture without adding a ton of noise. Now, it does add some noise to it, but not a lot. It is quite manageable. And then if you zoom really far in, you can see where we had all of our star bubbles that got removed. So that's what makes this image difficult, is all of those stars. So I really like where we're at. If you want, you can add more saturation and you can paint in the reds over here and the reds down here. You know, again, this is all you. I'm pretty happy with where this is at myself. We really stretched that blue out nicely, and it gives it a lot of contrast between the crescent and the background. So without it, it's kind of blurry here, but as soon as you add it, it looks good. So we're gonna say right click, flatten image, and I'm gonna say that that's good for me. So I'm gonna say right click, save as, and we're going to call this RGB2 as a TIFF file. Say OK. Move back into PixInsight. Move this image. Let's move it down here because we're done with it. Let's open up RGB2. And then, because I like the idea of running it again, just because we did run the high pass, we're going to run Noise Exterminator again, but we have to make sure to unselect linear and then run that. We'll be right back. So now that that's run, it really hasn't done a ton for us, but if we just watch ever so slightly, you can see it does help drastically keep our colors blending smoothly, as opposed to abrupt color changes. But also, there's a lot of noise down inside of this area, pardon me. So if you just watch right inside of here, we're gonna run it, and you can see how it cleaned up that whole area. So we have a nice clean image. It does add a level of blurriness back to it because it does blur some of your edges a little bit. But when you zoom out all the way, you honestly can't tell. I mean, it's definitely a under a microscope feeling in this case. So with that, let's go ahead and call this image done. But we can't say completely done, we obviously need our stars back in. So we're going to say pixel math. And actually, you know what I'm going to do first? Sometimes star reduction can mess with your data. I'm going to go ahead and reduce the stars here. I'm going to go to Script, Easy Processing Suite. This is a free plugin, so you can go download it. I've talked about it in other videos, but you can definitely go just Google search Easy Processing Suite PixInsight, and you should be able to find the download for that and information on how to install it. We're going to go star reduction, continue anyways. We're going to say create a star mask for reduction. This does take a little bit, so I'll be right back. Once your mask is done, just simply say run easy star reduction. All right, so we will go ahead and delete the star mask because I don't really want it in anymore. And you can do before and after, and just look at the level of brightness it brings it down. But one thing I don't like is we have these diffraction spikes, right? Well, reduction actually kills some of that spike. So one thing you can do with this is save this version. Let's say save as, and let's say stars 1. Because we're going to take this to Photoshop, and we're going to keep the diffraction stars intact. And then we have our reduced one, so we're going to do File, Save As, Stars 2, 16-bit integer. Okay, so now we're going to minimize our stars here because we're done with it. We're going to go back to Photoshop real quick. We're going to open stars 1 and 2. So stars 1 is the bright version, stars 2 is not. So we want to make stars 2 our base, because all we want to do is put back in our big diffraction spike. So to do that, do Control A, Control C. Come over here, click inside the background here just to make it the active area, and do Control V to paste. And now you can click the eyeball and it'll turn on and off the layer. And we don't want all of those stars, we only want some of them. So to do that, we need to mask. What we do is make sure layer 1 is there. We'll click the mask tool. And now we're going to do Control I to invert it, because we want to see what we're going to actually have, and we only want to paint in the stars that we like. So paintbrush, make sure white is on the top. White because we inverted to make it black to say we wanted to paint anything that's white back into the image. We'll go to opacity. We can bump this all the way up, that's fine. Flow as well. And we're just going to click on the stars with diffraction spikes. 1, 2, 3. And just resize with your bracket tool, or excuse me, your brackets on your keyboard to be close to the fractions. So just a couple clicks on each one of these. Okay, so we've got a couple stars that really make it pop. I think that's fine. So we'll right click there, say Flatten Image, and now we're done. So we just keep those stars intact. So we'll say RGB stars 2. And okay, and the naming convention is completely up to you. That's just so I know which one I want. But the reason why I call it RGB stars 2 is because inside of, pardon me, PixInsight already had the stars, or RGB stars 1, if you will. So we will minimize this, drag it over. We're going to go to Pixel Math. Now we want to combine RGB2 and RGB stars 2. We'll go to Expression Editor. So RGB2 space plus space RGB stars 2. Say OK. Click, drag, and drop. And now our stars are in. They are shrunk. And now we have a final image. And we've got some amazing data. We have amazing amounts of contrast with this. So from here, what we can now do is go click your lightness mask. It's extracting the channel, but I just call it a Luminance Mask. We're going to drag that tab again, minimize the mask, right click, show mask, show mask. We'll drag the actual mask over here. We're going to go to local histogram equalization. And now, because we have some great details in here, I'm going to bump this down to 75 and 40%. I'm going to drag and drop, and we'll be back in just a second. Now that that's done, I'm going to minimize, and let's zoom in and look at what we just did. Before and after. Before and after. You see how it kind of lightens up some of the areas, but if you look right in this general region right here, see how we have like this area of dark, this area of dark, before and after. See how just the surrounding area actually enhances the dark areas by lightening those up. It actually makes those areas darker, and it gives it a little bit more contrast. And this, I think this is like a dark nebula right here. Whatever this is, it's incredible, but no light passes through that. I thought it was an artifact on my first image, but then I've seen it on everybody else's image, and it's pretty incredible given how this star seems like it's right next to it, but I have a feeling this star is probably nowhere near it. I think we're going to call that done. So you can go back into Photoshop at this point. You can mess with your colors a little bit more. You can, you can mess with your colors at any point. It's easiest to mess with the colors and the saturation while you don't have stars in there. Otherwise, you're going to blow your stars out at the same time. And it's too hard to make a mask with your stars in it and try to cut your stars out. Just go ahead and run Russell Crowe's Star Exterminator, get the stars out, change your colors, and then put the stars back in. But from here, this is an incredible image. This came from a one-shot color camera, which is really hard to believe, but it's effectively making a monochrome HOO version, and it's actually really, really good. Getting one-shot color details with Oxygen 3 is very difficult, so the fact that Peter was able to get this with his f3.9 Newtonian definitely helped out a lot. Having faster optics and then also the larger aperture is definitely going to help him a lot with only having that one-shot color. So from here, you can again modify your reds. You can make them brighter, make them dimmer, make them cooler, make them warmer, whatever you want to do. It's all about the style that you prefer to see. I think this is fine the way it is. It's not overbearing with any one color, but they all kind of contrast and they bring out the best in each other, right? We have some beautiful blues in there that mix in well with our reds to lighten up those reds inside of the crescent, but then the red on the outside is a little bit darker, and it just gives a really good feel, I think, from my perspective. From here, though, thank you so much for joining. Make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, hit the thumbs up if you liked this. Be sure to follow me in this journey. I've got a lot coming up. We've got some amazing clear skies on the horizon, and I've already started my next project and next video with that as well. So until next time, thank you again, and clear skies.